I've had a recent change of heart in American politics. This is the reason why I'm talking about this today. I have had a change in politics, and this has happened maybe just in the last couple of weeks. I've been thinking about it a lot as we approach the 2024 election. I know that politics is about preference. Sometimes you have to choose between the lesser of two evils. That was certainly the case for me in 2016. Um, I didn't love Ted Cruz. I didn't love Donald Trump. But in the end, I had to make a choice based on my preferences. When it came down to even after the nominations between Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump, I didn't love either of those candidates, but there was just no question in my mind Hillary Clinton is way worse than Donald Trump. Way worse. And so, even though politics is about preference, sometimes, and this is where I'm changing, sometimes you have to think about your actual ideologies, the principles behind your beliefs. And what I realized, and I'm going to talk about it a little bit later when I talk about the conference I went to this week, there are actual consequences behind ideas. And sometimes we tell ourselves that politicians are part of camps. We say Donald Trump is a conservative, but we didn't actually sit to think for ourselves for a second what that actually meant. What is conservatism? And upon further investigation, what I found is that Donald Trump is not a conservative at all. What I found is that there are a lot of politicians that are Republicans, but they're not actually conservatives. And frankly, I've actually found that some Democrats are conservatives. And so this doesn't mean I'm voting Democrat. I don't see any Democrat right now in enough that has enough support from their party that I would ever support them. I would have a hard time voting Democrat in my lifetime, but it's not off the table because it's ridiculous to take that off the table. I guess what I'm trying to say is the reason why this story is important is because it shows that Biden is not conservative. Biden is not, he doesn't embody the principles that I care about. And I used to not care about that so much in my politicians, but I'm starting to more now. Are these people that we actually should look up to and that are actually going to triumph over evil? They're actually going to go forward with correct principles and attack evil. Again, sometimes it's order of preferences. We're dealing with a nation that has many different opinions, and so preferences are important. But in this instance, the reason why I think this is important is because it shows the Biden family is not virtuous. The Biden family does not have principles or beliefs that actually motivate them. We'll continue to talk about this more in the podcast. I care more personally about critiquing the right at this point because I want them to be successful than the left. Everyone knows that the Bidens aren't anything virtuous or righteous. But I want to talk a little bit about the state of the rising generation in the conservative movement. And this comes from the conference that I was just at. So this week I went to the Young America's Foundation conference in DC. We stayed at the JW Marriott, super pretty. It was right next to the White House. It was an awesome conference, generously supported by sponsors. So it was free for me to go. Free for a lot of students to go. There were probably 400, 500 students there. And we heard from some really cool people. Just to name a few, we heard from Liz Wheeler. We heard from Vivek Ramaswamy, Mike Pompeo, Lila Rose, Zuby, Enes Kanter Freedom, Riley Gaines, etc. I mean, we heard from like 40 people, but those are just some of the most noteworthy. And they were all really great speakers, all conservative, came from different walks of life. And all of it was free. So really cool. And there, like I said, there were 400 to 500 young adults there that were in college, just like me. And I want to give my overall impressions of the conference, but more importantly, where we're headed as a nation, because the rising generation is where we're going to be in 20, 30 years. I mean, the people that were at the conference already are voters. They're actively participating in the political process. Very soon, in the next 2 or 3 years, they can run for Congress and then beyond. And so it's not too much further until the people that were at this conference may have a big impact politically on our country. What I noticed from the speakers at this conference and what I want to talk about is that the leaders of the conservative movement are pushing virtue. I was very happy. I was very encouraged to be at this conference because all of the speakers were talking about godly principles. Some of them were talking a little bit more Republican, if that makes sense. They were talking politically, like vote Republican. But for the most part, they were talking about allegiance to an idea, the idea of conservatism, the idea that there are limiting principles on government and that we have God-given rights, and that these rights are essentially protecting us from the government. They're not given to, we're not getting these rights from the government. The government is simply there to protect those rights. They were already given to us from God. These are what the speakers were talking about. There's almost no speech that was done this week where God was not mentioned in it. And as a Christian conservative, that was really encouraging to me. It reaffirmed to me that my faith still coincides with my political beliefs, which I think is really important for everyone to have. If your faith and your political beliefs are at odds with each other, you got to really rethink those. You got to rethink one of them. Just a couple of like smaller observations, then I want to get to the big idea with all of this. People loved Vivek Ramaswamy. I mean, he was awesome. I love Vivek Ramaswamy. And for pretty much every single speaker, I was the front row. I was pretty zealous about getting in the front row. Some of these were dinners, and some of them were just kind of tables, if that makes sense, where you're just kind of sitting and listening. But Vivek Ramaswamy was a dinner. I was literally in the front row. I was probably 10 feet away from him as he spoke. Spoke for maybe an hour and 15 minutes. He took questions. Some of the questions were pretty controversial. Some of them were like pretty standard. Any Republican or any conservative could have answered them and given the classic conservative answer. But he took hard questions too. He talked about Ukraine and his hard stance on that, as well as China, which is not necessarily the most popular belief, even among conservatives. Just the night before, we had Mike Pompeo, who was very pro-Ukraine and pro-sending the money, whereas Vivek Ramaswamy is very much wanting to end that war and stop supporting Ukraine. And so it's really amazing to hear his great honesty. What I want to say about Vivek Ramaswamy really quick is it was amazing it's amazing to me how his personal flair of being there really increased people's support for him. So that whole day, people were asking each other. I was in conversation with all kinds of people about who are you supporting for 2024? And it was always Trump, DeSantis, one or the other. I would say it's about a 50-50 split in the room. Personally, I thought the Trump people didn't have a really strong argument for it. The DeSantis people were pretty classic, just good policy. We like what he's done in Florida. A lot of people I spoke to were from Florida or at least going to school in Florida. So it makes sense that they would support him. But after Vivek came and spoke, a lot of them started saying, you know what, I might vote for Vivek Ramaswamy. And what it taught me is that it's amazing in elections how personal one-on-one interactions trump everything. You can get on the news and start speaking to people. You can win in debates. You can do all these online things, and certainly they work very well. And frankly, Vivek Ramaswamy has done a great job through media. But nothing trumps that one-on-one experience. And even myself, who would not consider myself a Vivek Ramaswamy, number one, I certainly like the guy, but I'm definitely a Ron DeSantis guy. I'm open about this. Even him being there, I thought to myself, dang, like just his presence, it feels special. When I go to vote at the ballot box, I'm not going to think to myself, oh, I've seen Donald Trump in person. I've never seen him speak in person. But I've seen Ron DeSantis and I've seen Vivek Ramaswamy speak in person just in the last few months. And so that, to me, is going to make a big difference. And so I saw that. Anyway, that was just a little bit of a thing. A lot more people were on board with Vivek after hearing him speak. It was very cool. I will say as well, the best applause of the whole conference, it lasted probably 30 seconds long. And it was when Vivek Ramaswamy was kind of going on his little, his campaign slogan is truth. And what he was talking about, basically he says truth, and then he speaks of the truths. He kind of has like these 9 core truths. Some of them are like, God is real. There are 2 genders, things like that. The applause was insane. It was electric when he was saying those. And here's what and I was hyped too, by the way. And here's what I realized. People are hungry for truth. When they hear those core truths that we know, we don't need to even see. The studies and the science support them, sure, but we don't even need to see those things. When we hear those truths, it resonates within us as conservatives, and we cannot help but clap and freak out because they're under attack. And that was something that Vivek Ramaswamy did very well, and it just reminded me of how conservatism is founded on core truths. It has a foundation, a rock foundation, whereas progressivism has no foundation, has no limiting principles. I fear that this is what I want to end on. This is my critique of the right for the day. It goes along with what I talked about Joe Biden, the reason why I've covered the story with his 7th grandchild, maybe. I fear that too many on the right have no reason for supporting Trump anymore. This is what I noticed at the conference. And I've noticed it on social media as well. They want him because the left attacks him. And that's the only reason why. Because the left is attacking him, they've decided that somehow he's their hero without actually looking to see if he is conservative or not, which is what I brought up before. The biggest realization I had about America's conservative youth is that when we want actual conservative principles, when I guess saying it this way, we want conservative principles. We want truth. That was evident in Vivek Ramaswamy just simply saying those things. And he's saying them powerfully, with great stage presence. But when he was saying those, the room was like on their feet, cheering. Trump doesn't stand for those principles anymore. Most conservatives, if you ask them, is Trump a virtuous guy? They're going to say no. You're going to ask, why are you voting for him? They're going to say something along the lines of, he's going to get the job done, or look at how the left is attacking him. And I'm not saying getting the job done is not a reason, but here's what I'm saying. Are we conservatives or are we Trumpians? And if you're Trumpian, fine. But what I'm saying is that there's a lot of conservatives out there that are sick and tired of politicians that don't actually have a desire to put forth conservative principles. We talked about being a good husband, father, mother, daughter, being chaste and virtuous during this conference. A lot of speakers are talking about it. Those are all the things that Trump is not. Trump is not virtuous. He's not chaste. This isn't a secret. I'm not trying to belittle Trump or throw out these ad hominems. It's just a fact. He cheats on his wife. It is what it is. And conservatives, or I should say non-conservatives, Republicans are saying, we don't care. But do we care about conservative principles, or do we care about random allegiance to a man that we've made out to be a god? My final word on this is the conservative youth are powerful. Our ideas are just simply sound. They're just correct. Our biggest obstacles are laziness and not being savvy enough. People on the left are very savvy. They're ready to go. They've got plans. They've got ways to cheat and rig. The question is, do conservatives, especially the youth that are coming up, have the same sort of tools to fight back? And I'm not saying tools that are evil, but fighting back by the same rules that they use, as well as using virtuous principles to attack the left. We have to be savvy enough, and we cannot be lazy into just supporting random people without actually vetting them and thinking to ourselves, are they actually conservatives?